Happy Touch-Up Thursday, y'all. I missed, I think, a few things you guys might want to know about, a couple definitions that you're going to get thrown at you. And that real estate lingo video I dropped last Friday. So I'm going to add some stuff to that video. Hi, my name's Matt Coach. I created this YouTube channel to share the tips, tricks, and mistakes that I make on the way to building a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. Today is Touch-Up Thursday, and I'm adding to my old video, Real Estate Lingo for Noobs, a new slide onto that. So, hope you guys enjoy it. Take the extra little tidbit of info and see if it matters for you. But so real estate just have too many words. Feels like you can't understand what's going on in those conversations. Feel like it's too complicated. Well, and this is the video for you. My name is Matt Coach, and this YouTube channel is about me describing the tips, tricks, and mistakes that I'm making on the way to building a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. Today, I'm just going to chat you guys with a bunch of different vocab words and describe them to you, what they mean, and how they affect, different real estate transactions. So we're going to go over, big five of real estate, right? Like you got your investor talks. So what you're going to talk about with other investors, what you're going to talk to for realtors, what you're going to talk to lenders, and what you're going to talk to with contractors, and then what you're going to talk about with property managers. So I'm going to go over all the different terms, all the things. Maybe you've heard some of them, maybe you haven't heard other ones. I guarantee you'll hear every single one of these if you get into the world of real estate. So if you know these, you should be able to go to any kind of cocktail party or whatever and talk to any real estate type person and feel like you're in the know on all the stuff. So without further ado, let's get it rocking. What's up, everybody? Here is real estate lingo for noobs, a few definitions to know before getting into real estate. This is like, if you can just know everything inside this video, you can get all of the clout of being somebody who knows about real estate without having to take any of the risk. It's the perfect video for you if you're just there to, go to dinner parties and sound like you're really smart. So just go and memorize these words, and people will be like, wow, you know a lot about investments and real estate and stuff. You can be like, yeah, I'm super smart. You can see the vocab list right here. I think I even stopped adding at some point. This is like 3 fonts. So this is mostly for me, just to keep track of everything. But we'll start with, investors. I broke this down into 5 categories, basically the 5 different people that you're going to talk to in a real estate. If you're going to be a real estate investor, one is going to be other investors, what they're going to talk to you about, the kind of words and whatever jumble that they're going to talk to each other about that they're getting on their investments and all the different acronyms and stuff like that. 2 is going to be buying houses, that's realtors, and wholesalers. If you don't know what a wholesaler is, I'm going to describe it later. It's one of the words. And then, the next is going to be fixing houses, so, what you're talking to with general contractors. Then after that, we got property managers. So, what you're going to talk to about tenants, people moving into your house, what they have to do, things along those lines. And then very last one's just going to be lenders. People give you money for your houses to fix them up and things along those lines. So without further ado, investors, first one, appreciation. So if your house is worth $100,000 and then the next year it's worth $110,000, you got appreciation of the house, right? That difference, that $10,000, your house appreciated $10,000 or 10%, right? So that's what appreciation is, just it going up in value. Then you got depreciation, which sounds like the opposite of appreciation, and it somewhat is, but in this aspect, it's a write-off on your taxes for parts of the house that decrease in value. So this is going to be a little hard to understand, right? Your house goes up in value typically, right? That's the expectation usually when you buy a house, that it goes up in value. But if you think about logically, right, if you were to, say, buy like a fridge for your house, right, that fridge is worth $500, say, when you buy it, and then you go to sell it 10 years later, it's probably not worth that $500 anymore. It went down in value. It depreciated. So each individual part of the house is actually depreciating. Like, you can think of like the windows that are getting worse, right? The paint's starting to chip, the flooring and carpet gets worse. It all goes down in value and gets worse. So what the IRS lets you do is write off those costs to your house. So as your house is, as a whole going up in value, you're writing off the individual parts of your house as it's going down in value. The IRS lets you do that in two different ways. They can do standard depreciation, which is just the whole house, very simple, over 27 and a half years, 39 if you're into like apartment complexes and commercial housing. But for the purpose of this, I'm just really only talking to you guys about kind of your residential investing. But yeah, that's 27 and a half years is typically how you do it, unless you do something called a cost segregation, which is where they itemize each part of your house to get more depreciation. So you can think that if your whole house, basically they're writing it off over 27 and a half years, they're saying basically your whole house is going to have to be a whole new thing every 27 and a half years. But if you think about it, it's probably going to be quicker than that for a lot of the spots in your house, right? Like, your carpet's not going to last that long. So what they do is they have a cost segregation study where they break down your house into things that are 5 years, 15 years, or 27 and a half years. So, something like the roof of your house, basically anything that's structural, is going to be 27 and a half years. That you can write that off for, but like your windows are more in that 15-year range, and something like carpet is in that 5-year range, or paint. So what you can do after you get a cost segregation study, and obviously you're writing off more because you're writing off your expenses for carpet, instead of over 27 and a half years, you're writing it out over 5 years, because that's how long your carpet's going to last for. You can do something called bonus depreciation, where everything that they categorize in this cost segregation study that's not 27 and a half years, you can take that all in your very first year. They recently changed this, and they're talking about changing it back. So now you can only take 60% of all of that cost segregation, all these different things. It used to be 100%. They're talking about lowering it to 0. Now they're talking about bringing it back. So anyways, I am not an accountant or a lawyer. I probably should set that off the bat. So this is not legal advice or tax advice. This is just stuff that you should know if you're going to get into real estate, different tax write-offs and stuff. That's what all the investor people like to talk about. Your next step, amortization. That's you paying down the principal of a loan, right? So if you take out a loan against a house and it does not appreciate at all, right? You take out, it's a $100,000 house, you put $20,000 down, you got an $80,000 loan. Over the course of 30 years is your typical mortgage, right? At that 30-year mark, you've paid off that full $80,000, right? That is fully amortized loan, right? So now that house, even if it was still worth only $100,000, you put in $20,000, and now since that loan's all the way paid off, you got that value of $100,000. You got that 5x return in 30 years, despite that house not going up in value, which is pretty unrealistic. So this is what a lot of people love about real estate right here. Is you got obviously you got cash flow from your rentals and whatnot. But you also get that appreciation long term. You're writing stuff off with the depreciation, and you're paying down that loan, so you're getting value there too. So that's what they like about real estate. That's why I'm in it. That's why most people are in it. Next step we got is equity right here. So that's the value of your house minus the loan against it. So you have a $100,000 house and you have an $80K loan against it, right? 100 minus 80, your equity is $20,000. So that's essentially the amount, if you were to sell your house, that it's actually would come back into your pocket, is your equity, right? Then a value add is an improvement to the house, the value of the house. that you make, right? So if you add new value or new windows to the house, that's a value add, right? Like the house is worth more now because it has new windows. So that's a value add. Sweat equity is the process of building equity in a house through value adds, right? So if you go and say like, hey, I'm going to replace all the windows, I'm going to do a whole new paint into the house. These are all things that are adding value to that house and building equity inside that house because it's now higher in value due to you putting in that work to it. So that's what sweat equity is that rehab process that raises value of that house. Your next step, ROI, return on investment. This is a general investment term. But if you put in $100,000 to a house, you wait, you get $10,000 from the rent of it, and it goes up $10,000 and you sell it the next year. That would be your return on investment, would be that $20,000, the 10 you made from the rents and the 10 you made from appreciation. So you would get a 20% return on your investment if that was the case for you. CapEx, short for capital expenditures. This is the money spent to fix up a house over the long-term ownership of a house. So as you own a house, you're going to have to do things like replace the roof, paint it over again. These are capital expenditures, and they are usually something that you budget for inside of the rent. So you take out a certain portion of your rent for capital expenditures. Typically, if you have a house that's brand new, you'll take out less in this space. If you have an older house, you'll take out more in this space. But we all know that eventually you're going to have to do things like fix a roof inside of a house or replace new windows. So you have to budget for that, and that is what your CapEx or capital expenditures are. PITI is an acronym for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. These are the fixed costs you have against your house. So this is what a mortgage company is typically taking out. In a mortgage is you usually set it up in a way that they take out principal and interest for sure. That's what the loan is. But they also can take out taxes and your home insurance. And that is your PITI for the house. So that's what you're paying a mortgage company usually when you go and buy a house. NOI stands for net operating income. That's the amount of money you make in a year of owning the house without factoring in your PITI right here. So, if you were to buy a house for $100,000 and it makes $7,000 after, without you having to pay any kind of mortgage company, that is what your NOI would be, is that $7,000. So cap rate is your return on your house if you bought it outright. So again, that same example, if you have a $100,000 house, it makes $7,000 from your rent minus your other expenses that you have inside the house. So that's things like property management. That's things like this CapEx right here. You have a 7% cap rate. So the formula is cap rate is equal to your NOI divided by the price of your house. You'll hear a lot of people talk about OPM. That stands for other people's money, and leveraging it. So that's essentially your leverage is your debt that you're using to buy the asset, and your OPM is just other people's money, right? So that's a bank, a lender, your uncle, what have you. That's what OPM stands for, is other people's money. A lot of people throw that OPM around, leverage OPM. You'll hear that a lot once you get into if you get into all the real estate peoples and all the different influencers in that space. All right, moving on. We are into buying houses. There's actually so much on this. I have 2 slides on buying houses because it just got too small. But we'll start with an on-market house. That's a house found on the MLS. The MLS is the multiple listing service. So this is a database for all the houses for sale. And this is typically for realtors. So Zillow is like a website that has access to the MLS. So typically if you're going on market, that means it's listed with the MLS, and it has a number attached to it that can be looked up by anyone who's a licensed realtor in the state. A realtor, just someone who sells
on-market houses for commission, they have to get a license for it. Commission, that's the fee a realtor gets for helping someone sell a house, right? So when they get it done, they get a commission. Your EMD, that stands for your earnest money deposit. So when you go to buy a house, you have a good faith payment, putting the house under contract. So you can think that if you're, accepted a house for, accept your $100,000 house, that, if you give them $100, $200 as an earnest money deposit, that shows that you're serious basically about buying the house. And they're going to hold that while you go through and you look at the house and you make sure things are working to, your standard, where you might ask them to make some kind of fixes to the house or something like that. We got off-market houses. That's just houses not on the MLS. This is what is typically sold by wholesalers. So, if you just knew a friend of a friend, Jim knows Bob who wants to sell their house to an investor. Jim knows an investor and connects the investor to Bob, right? That's an off-market deal. Happens a lot with wholesalers, right? And that's someone who finds and assigns contracts for off-market houses. So you're thinking, okay, that's kind of similar to a realtor. What's kind of the difference with a wholesaler and what they do? Well, a wholesaler negotiates the house directly with the seller. So it's like they're negotiating directly with that person to buy that house, and then they're negotiating again with the investor. That difference of the two prices is their assignment fee. So it's like their commission is an assignment fee. So, if they agree to, Jim goes to Bob, he says, hey, I'll buy your house for $80,000. And then Jim knows Joe, who's an investor, and he goes, hey, Joe, I'll sell you this house for $100,000. And Joe thinks that that's a good deal. Then Jim over there would just make a $20,000 assignment fee on reassigning that contract to Joe. So then you'll hear comps get thrown around. That's comparable houses. So that's similar houses in the area that have sold recently. If you ever get an appraisal on your house, this is usually how they decide the value. Is they go, hey, what houses have sold here in like the last year? If you have a 3-bed, 1-bath, 1,500 square foot house, they're going to be like, hey, one sold for $100,000, a quarter mile that way, and then a third of a mile the other way we saw one for $120,000, and then one next door sold for $110,000, and they'll kind of just take the average of those houses and kind of say your house is in that general ballpark when you get an appraisal. So a comp is essentially what you can think your house will sell for, that rough area of what that house is going to sell for when you fix it all the way up. Back taxes, that's taxes that are owed that are past due on the house. So if you pass kind of the due date for taxes, you're going to have back taxes. They'll have extra fees. A lot of the times you'll find these wholesalers will have houses that have back taxes on them. That's how they get them from off-market people. And then we have a lien. So that's the right to a house if a debt's not paid, right? So like a mortgage company, a lender is going to take out a lien against your house. They're going to take your house if you don't pay them that debt. That's what a lien is. You can also get like a mechanic's lien. So if somebody comes to fix your house, like a contractor, you don't pay them, they can take out a mechanic's lien against that house so that they get paid if you ever sell that house. A FSBO, FSBO stands for sale by owner. That's just a house that's the owner themselves and representing themselves in negotiation. They don't have a realtor or a wholesaler that they're accompanying themselves with. The inspection period is the time you're under a contract for a house that you can back out of the house if it has problems. Right? So if you are going to close for a house in a month, you might give yourself a 1 or 2 week inspection period, right? So, you're going to bring an inspector to the house. They're going to tell you, is the plumbing good? Is the electrical good? Does the roof need to be fixed? All those kind of things. And, that's basically during that time, you can decide whether you should back out or renegotiate a deal during that inspection period because, maybe more issues are found than expected for the house. Then simply SFH, that stands for single family home. That's your typical house that's made for one family to live at. MFH, that's multifamily homes, so a house made for 2 or more people. So that's usually your duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. That's usually what multifamily is referring to, but also could go up to, like apartment complexes and things bigger than that. More buying houses. So we're going to get into kind of the creative financing space is these next few options. So if you hear creative financing, they mean one of these 3 things usually is a seller finance deal. And that's when the owner gives a loan against the house to the next buyer, like similar to how your bank or lender would. So instead of you going to the bank, Tim agrees with Bob to buy his house for $100K. He goes to a bank, he gives them a down payment, and then they pay the rest. That's how most people do it. Instead of doing that, they just kick the bank completely out of the situation, and Tim agrees to pay Bob, say $20,000 or something like that, or $10,000 and $750 a month for the next 10 years to pay off the rest of the house, right? So if you're ever wondering why would somebody agree to that when they could just have all the $100,000 right there on the upfront from the bank paying, there's a couple reasons. One, it's a pretty big tax burden kind of a thing. So depending on that person's situation, they might not want to pay all those taxes in 1 year. That's a very common reason why seller financing could happen. There's also typically like this maths out to $100,000 house for a 0% interest rate. That's usually not the way that this would work. They usually would get some interest rate, some return on their investment. So this might be a loan. For instance, if Bob's house was actually worth something more like $80,000 and he wants to sell it for $100,000, this might be a way to negotiate that where both sides could feel happy that Tim got in for $10,000 instead of how much a bank would charge him, and then Bob's going to get an extra $20,000 on his house over the course of that loan in interest. So that's something that a seller finance deal would typically be more along the lines of something that probably would make sense to you guys, rather than this kind of cherry-picked example where this would be a 0% interest rate, just flat payments for an understanding purpose. Subject to or sub to, you'll hear this a lot too in the creative financing world, and that's just taking over someone's mortgage payments in exchange for titles and right to the property. So you see this a lot right now because somebody bought a house and they have a 3% mortgage on that house because they bought it during when 3% mortgages were, and now they're like 7-8% right now, right? So people like that 3% mortgage. And the other thing is that in general, that's not always the case, but in general, over the as you look at houses, they go down in value a little bit when interest rates change. It's not exactly proportionate, but houses go down a little bit in value. So somebody might have bought a $100,000 house at a 3% interest rate, and now it's only worth $90,000. And because they bought it 2 or 3 years ago, that loan hasn't amortized to the point where that $90,000 that they could sell it for pays off their full loan. So they actually would lose money selling their house. So a lot of the times it can make sense to do a subject to type deal for somebody who wants that 3% mortgage rate, that lower payment. They're going to rent out the house. They're going to get more money that way. And then the other person is, instead of losing money selling their house, is, giving up their mortgage to somebody else. That's kind of the ideal example of a subject to, although a lot of the times people can make this and have equity inside the house. They can negotiate to just pay somebody directly for a subject to. Maybe, their house has that $75,000 left on that loan at 3% and it's worth $100,000 still. Somebody might just pay that person directly that $25,000 to keep that 3% loan so they have less payments. That's also an example of sub 2 that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. Then a wrap mortgage is a special situation with seller finance where there's still a mortgage on the property, and what they kind of do is they wrap a seller finance based mortgage So, Bob has his seller finance mortgage. He's, getting more off of that mortgage that he agreed to with Tim to buy the house with. Tim wants to buy the house, right? Bob has a mortgage on the house. He agrees to seller finance it over to Tim. Tim, gets to pay Bob 10 grand down, $750 a month for the next 10 years. Bob's taking that $750 and he's paying that $500 a month that he has for that original mortgage. Then he's getting to keep the other $250. So that's just a situation, wrap mortgage that could make sense in some specific spots. But when somebody is talking to you about creative financing and they kind of just blanketly state that, they're usually meaning either seller finance subject to or wrap mortgages. And ways to buy houses, because this is ways that you can negotiate to buy a house with little to no money into the house. So, it's a way to possibly get into real estate when you have no dollars, is one of these three options. You can kind of decide if that's actually worth it. If you probably have no money, it might not be the smartest thing to do, because eventually you have to do things like fix the windows and stuff. If you don't have any money, then you're probably still not in a very good spot, and that other person has the rights to your house if you default like a bank would. So that's how they get secured in that whole situation, is that it's like not paying the bank. They foreclose on you the same way. Next is an auction. So it's like a normal auction. A house is sold to the highest bidder. This usually happens because it was foreclosed on by a bank, or they owed too much in taxes. So they try and start the bidding usually at how much is owed on that house, and then go from there. So that is an auction house. Probate is when somebody dies and then the owner is determined by the estate, so there isn't a clear understanding of who the next in line owner is of the house or how it's distributed. That is probate. So a lot of the times houses get sold during probate because it's a big pain when big families getting together and discussing a house. But it's still a pain for you guys because you have to do all the legal stuff. So it's a push and a pull. A short sale is when a property is sold for less than a debt owed on it. So if a lender agrees that even though you owe $30,000, your house is only worth $25,000, to sell it for that, that is a short sale on the house. Pre-foreclosure, house that's fallen behind on payments. What does that lead to? That leads to foreclosure, when the lender takes control of a property because it's fallen too far behind on payments. A vacant house means no one's living in that house. So if you see a house is vacant, no one's in there, you can move in your own new renter or fix it up or what have you. Turnkey is that the house is ready to live in, does not need repairs. You should always check a house if they say it's turnkey. A lot of the times it is not. So you always want to verify this, that a house is actually in a living ready state when they say that it's turnkey. But that's what that means. Your title company, that's basically the middleman between the buyer and seller. That's basically facilitating the change of title and keeping all the money. As you can imagine, if somebody had the title and somebody had the money and one of them gave it up first, there could be issues. So there's a middleman there called the title company. Let's make sure everything basically gets done legally. Escrow is money in a holding account, usually with that title company for a specific purpose, right? So if you go to buy a house for $100,000 and they're saying, hey, the house gets closed on, the 5th or 6th, and you wire in that money on the 1st, they're going to hold it in escrow and wait till, all the documents get finalized and finished before they send it over to the seller. So that is what an escrow is basically a holding account for money that's transferring between one person to the other, and it's in kind of some middleman purgatory space while other things are going down. So asking price, what the seller wants for the house, pretty easy. If they're asking $100K, that is what their asking price is. OBO stands for or best offer, so that just means the best offer is what they're going to take for the house. It's pretty typical, right? Most things are going to be OBO. motivated seller, someone who has an actual reason for selling a house in a given time frame. A lot of these are reasons. Pre-foreclosure is a real big one, or probate is they're about to have a pain that's going on, and they need to sell their house quickly. That's a motivated seller. Distressed property, and that's just a property that has issues. Most of the properties that you're going to buy as an investor is going to be a distressed property. That's typically what the wholesalers are going after, are these houses that have issues, and they're trying to kind of negotiate with somebody that their house has a bunch of issues. They need to sell it for cheaper, and then they go and redistribute it to an investor who fixes up houses, deals with those kind of issues, and then they get their fee in the middle, right? So that's what a distressed property is. Moving on, fixing houses. So you go to fix a house. A lot of the times you're gonna have to pull permits. That's a fee paid to the city. Allows a licensed professional to fix a part of the house. So if you got to put in all new electrical or plumbing, or a new heating, cooling, all that kind of stuff, all the mechanicals right here, then usually you have to go and pull a permit in order to do that. Each state has different laws. Cities have different laws on what you need to pull permits for. But typically, if you got to put in all new kind of mechanical stuff that could cause fires and explosions and things, the city wants to know, and they want to make sure you put somebody with a license in to do that. Mechanicals, that's your electrical, HVAC, which is your heating and cooling, and plumbing. So if you ask about the mechanicals, you're going to be like, hey, do I have to replace the water heater or the furnace? Does it need new electrical wiring, things like that? Those are the questions you're going to deal with a licensed electrician, licensed HVAC specialist, or a licensed plumber in order to fix these kind of things. So that's going to be a question you're going to be asking to your realtor or wholesaler. What's the state of the mechanicals before you go to buy a house, so you can kind of create a budget around those things. There's a floor plan. Floor plan is just a picture of the house as it is constructed. So that's going to show where all the bathrooms, bedrooms are, the kitchen, what the size of them are. That's going to be your floor plan. Your site plan's a map-like view of the house. So you can think of it like it's going to show you, this is the closest street, this is the house, these are the two closest houses to it. There's a fence in between them or whatever. A lot of the times you'll need floor plans and site plans when you go to pull permits inside of a house. So they'll want to see that. General contractor, that's an individual licensed to manage construction projects in a given state. Your general contractor, you should be asking them if they're licensed, bonded, and insured. Same thing for electricians and HVAC specialists, plumbers, those kind of people. So you need to have a license in order to pull permits with a city. So that's going to be just showing that you are basically have the ability to do that specific thing. You're skilled in that aspect. You pass some sort of test and have the experience. Then insurance, in case that they do damage to the property that they are working on, so they need to be insured and have a liability coverage in case one of their people gets hurt or they do damage to the house. And then a bond happens to pay in case the contractor does not finish work that has been paid for. So say your contractor dies in the middle of fixing up your house, you have a bond to secure some money to get paid back to you in that situation. Water and fire damage, parts of the house have been damaged due to a major fire or water event, so there's a broken pipe and there's a bunch of water that spews out, and it messes up walls and ceilings and stuff like that, or there's issues with the electrical and a fire starts. So these are issues with faulty mechanicals. You see a major fire or water damage, you probably have to deal with new mechanicals in the spot. Foundations, the lower structure of the house, what it was built upon, right? Foundation issues are huge within a house. They can be tens of thousands of dollars. They tend to be the thing that can ruin a house. Otherwise great house with foundation issues can be a giant pain. So when you go through, you want to ask questions that are regarding these certain things. This one's just kind of a special one. A square is a 10 by 10 foot area, so they measure roofs and siding usually in squares. It's not square feet, it's squares. So 10 by 10 foot area, that's basically every 100 feet that they're working on, and they'll give you kind of quotes in that range of how many squares that roof or siding is. That'll be basically determine your price. So yeah, these are the questions that you're going to ask your contractor. Are they licensed, bonded, insured? Probably gives you other pictures of other work that they've done. But generally speaking, you also want to make sure when you're talking to your wholesaler or your realtor before you make an offer, what's the condition of the mechanicals inside the house, and you'll get pictures and whatnot of that house to see if it needs sprucing up, if it needs just new paint and things like that. I guess I'll add another one while you guys are here. Cosmetic rehab. So this typically means very light rehab. So when you're asking all these things, if a house has good electrical, heating, and all those furnace, it's just kind of a little bit ugly looking, needs a touch up with the paint. It doesn't need basically a new roof. That's generally what cosmetic rehabs, no new foundation. So nothing basically major that's going to cost you usually tens of thousands of dollars. It's usually something that can be done quickly and usually not even by licensed professionals. That's kind of your cosmetic rehab general area that you're looking about. All right, so we're into getting loans. Bunch of fun here. So getting loans, you have interest. So interest is the difference between the loan principal that you took out and what you actually ended up paying. That was your interest. The principal amount is the original amount of the loan. So in the example that you have a $100,000 or an $8,000 loan against a $100,000 house, right? If over the course of a 30-year loan, 30-year mortgage, you paid $180,000 total, right? That $80K is that principal, and that other $100,000 is your interest that you paid. Your interest rate is the rate that determines how much interest will be paid over that loan term. You want a lower interest rate if you're paying. You want a higher interest rate if you're receiving the money. That's pretty basic to understand. Loan term is just how long the loan is for. So if you go, hey, the loan term is 30 years, that is how long it's going to go. Right? So that's your loan term. Your prime rate is the rate set by the Federal Reserve on how much they are lending money for. So if the Federal Reserve is lending money at 1%, what's going to happen is that your lenders are going to mark it up by whatever their fees are for their loans, usually somewhere in the range of like 2.5% to 3%. So when they say the prime rate is 5 point whatever percent, that's why you see mortgage rates are in that kind of 7-8% range, is because what they're doing is they're doing their markup to the prime rate for their loans. So that's what you're seeing there. A mortgage is a loan against a house. Pretty standard, you guys probably knew that one. DSCR, it stands for debt service coverage ratio, and it's the ratio of how much your property makes divided by the payment of the property. So your NOI minus your PITI. So if your house is getting rented for $1,400 a month and you have $400 of natural expenses that comes through that house, right? You have $1,000 that you net from that house, and then a mortgage company says, hey, you got to pay $500 for our mortgage company, then your debt to service ratio is 2, right? So you get $1,000, right? Your mortgage payment, your PITI is $500, right? So your mortgage, your DSCR rate is 2. You're going to be looking, you want at least 1. That means that basically your house is getting covered by the rent payments, that loan's getting covered, so you can have that amortization and depreciation, all that stuff getting covered by your renter. But this is what they factor in for investment-based loans. So essentially, they're going to look at the house individually as its own kind of like business. Does it make enough money to pay for itself is basically what a DSCR loan is trying to determine. And every single lender is going to have their DSCR that they're looking for in order for you to get a loan at a certain loan to value, which is this next question right here. The ratio of how much your loan is for the house divided by the value of the house. So, if a bank's going to give you 75% loan to value, that means they're going to give you $75,000 if your house is worth $100,000. So that's a 75% LTV, 75% loan to value loan. And a lot of the times with these DSCRs, they'll have certain minimum DSCRs you have to hit in order to get their max LTV, which right now is typically 75%. At other times in the past, it's been 80%, but that's typically what you're going to see for most lenders right now. LTC stands for loan to cost, so it's similar to loan to value. That's the ratio of how much your loan is for the cost of buying a house and rehabbing the house. So if you get a loan for 80% loan to cost, what they're saying, if you buy a house for $60K and you say, hey, it's going to take $40,000 for me to fix the house, then they're going to give you $80,000 basically for you to buy and fix that house. So that would be an 80% loan to cost loan. So a lot of the times you'll get that on the upfront of a house. They'll usually lenders will take the lesser of whichever one on the upfront. So 75% loan to value, if they go through and they say, hey, your house is going to be worth $100,000. When it's done, they'll give you 75%, loan to value, so $75,000. And if you go, okay, or they'll give you 80%, say loan to cost. If you go like, hey, I'm going to do, I'm going to put in, $80,000 to fix up that house. Then they'll go, okay, 80% loan to cost. So that means we're going to give you $64,000. They're going to pick the lesser of the two. So they're going to go, hey, since our rule is either 80% loan to cost or 75% loan to value, whichever one's lower, we're going to give you $64,000 to buy and fix up that house. And that'll be how most lenders do that. Your amortization schedule that shows how much of the principal loan has been paid off at a specific interval within a loan. So this is where the banks get you, right? Is they actually take your interest up front. So it's not the way that you might typically think about it, where if you're like, hey, I got a $100,000 loan, it's at 7%. That means that every single year I am paying $7,000 of interest. So, if you calculate your payments and you're like, okay, I pay, $700 a month for that. So that's $8,400, so paid $7,000 in interest, $1,400 goes down on the loan. That might be at least how I used to logically do it. So I'd be like, hey, so the next year it's going to be at, 96,000 or whatever, 98.6 thousand. Would be your next month. That's not actually how it goes. Typically, you're paying like 95% interest for that first 5 years. You're paying down very little amount of your loan, which is why it's typically advised not to buy a house that you're not going to stay in for at least 5 years, because one, the housing market could change, goes down in value that quickly, but also you don't have the benefit of this amortization really hitting until it switches into your favor and you start paying off, that principal balance and getting more off. But for instance, if you have a $500 mortgage payment, it's very reasonable in your first year that $450 of that $500 payment is actually just going straight to interest. So you might think that you're going to be down, $2,000 or so on that loan after a year, and you find that you're actually only down a couple $100. So that's why an amortization schedule can be important, as you can see, hey, 10 years down the road, how much of this loan have I paid off? And you'll notice that it'll flip-flop, that towards the end of the loan, you'll be paying down the majority of the principal. And lenders like to do this because you have the ability to refinance your loan. So what they usually do is they'll have like a penalty or something, prepayment penalty. I'll add that one in here, right here, prepayment penalty. See, we're all learning together. Prepayment penalty, cost to pay off loan early. So usually they'll have a prepayment penalty if you pay within the first 5 years. Why? Because that's when they get all their interest. So they don't want you to do that. So they'll make you pay like a cost if you refinance out your loan usually, or if you sell your house in that first 5 years. That's why it's usually not recommended. So yeah, you don't want to be in that spot. So just know that you're not paying off a lot of that house in that first 5 years. So when you go to buy a house, usually you don't want to buy a house that you don't plan on holding for at least 5 years. Just generally, rule of thumb. Obviously, things can happen. Maybe your house goes up, $100,000 and doubles in value or whatever in a year, and you want to sell it. But that's the typical rule for amortization to come through, is that you're not really getting much anything for those first 5 years. Promissory note, that just states that a borrower is going to pay back their loan, or they're going to give the rights away of any kind of collateral, but specifically here in property, in any kind of mortgage. Your closing costs are the fees associated with closing a loan. So the title company that's going to be helping with closing out that loan, or the lender, they're going to have their own fees for writing all the stuff up and whatever else they end up doing. So that's going to be your closing costs. Some of those can be negotiated and taken away inside of a loan. Your appraisal, that's the value an appraiser gives to your house. They typically base this off of your comparable houses, but if you live in the country or something, it has to be a little bit more opinionated. But an appraiser is the value that a bank typically goes off of to determine this loan to value, determine the value part of that loan to value. So if they go 75% loan to value, and an appraiser says, hey, the house is worth $100K, they're going to go, hey, okay, we're going to be $75,000. The appraiser goes, hey, the house is worth $200K, they'd give you, $150,000 for that house. So it's very big to understand, what you're going to get essentially for your house from an appraisal. Down payment is a lump sum at the start of a loan. So if you have a 20% down payment for a $100,000 house, you're going to pay them $20,000 at the start of that loan. You got origination points as a fee attached to a loan. Broker typically for negotiating terms. So if you have a two origination points for a $100,000 loan, that means you're paying a $2,000 fee for that loan. So that's what points are. They're essentially a lump sum fee that's based off of 1 point is 1%, 2 points is 2%, and so forth. ARM stands for adjustable rate mortgage. That's a mortgage that has the ability to change, so it can go up and down. Typically, ARMs come with lower fees or don't have this prepayment penalty attached, so it can make some sense to get in ARMs. It's just a little bit risky if you expect mortgage payments to go down, so they're going to lock you in at the current rate, but if they go up, it's going to be a bad move. If it goes down, it could be a good move. And you kind of have the idea usually of refinancing out of one of these when mortgage rates get lower. You have a balloon payment. That's a lump sum payment during a loan or at the end of a loan. So you might agree to a loan. This happens a lot with creative financing. But what you essentially do is you agree to pay, some lump sum of that loan at some point. So you might agree, for instance, on a seller finance deal, right, that you're going to buy this house, going to give them, $10,000 down, going to pay them $500 a month, and you're going to buy the house for $100,000. And you go, hey, in a year, I'm going to give you a balloon payment of everything else that's left over of that $100,000. So, you might get in, maybe fix up that house, make it worth over $100,000, and then you go, okay, now that's all fixed up, I'm going to pay you back this balloon payment and have it written into a loan that you are responsible for doing that. Interest only Pretty simple. That's just a loan that doesn't pay at all towards the principal. It's only paying interest. Obviously, that's going to have lower payments. Oh no, you went up. It's going to have lower payments when you're doing an interest-only loan, but you're not paying down that principal, so you're not getting amortization. Wherever I had that before. DTI stands for debt to income. So that's the amount of money you spend every single month divided by the amount of money you make every single month. So if you make $10,000 a month and you spend $5,000 a month, your debt to income is 50%. Generally speaking, you want to be, I think it's 28% is the general kind of rule of thumb for debt to income. This can hose you at some point if you have enough mortgages on your credit profile. This can stuff your conventional loans, which is when you traditionally go through a bank with at least 20% down payment. They're going to look at your DTI, they're going to calculate that with your tax returns and whatnot, and they're going to decide whether they're willing to give this loan. This is why a lot of investors have to go through this DSCR process eventually, is that they just simply don't make enough money, and the house instead has to pay for it itself. That's why you do a DSCR type loan. FHA, a loan through Fannie Mae for first-time home buyers. Technically, you don't have to be a very first you don't have to be a first-time home buyer, but you can only have one FHA loan going at a time. So you put 3.5% to 5% of the loan. Typically, extra expenses on an FHA loan, you have to have PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. So essentially, if you default on the loan, the Fannie Mae needs to make sure you have the insurance to pay them all back. So you're paying more than just this mortgage payment. You also have to pay an insurance payment on top of that when you take out an FHA loan. And the VA is a veteran loan, 0% down for a house. So if you are a veteran, it's definitely good to have that 0% down for a house. One thing you're going to see these get mentioned for a lot, I should go out, put this in the investment spot for you guys, is house hacking. So that's buying a house and renting out rooms of the house to decrease payments. So you can do this, or you can buy a single family home, rent out rooms, or you can buy a multi-family home and rent out the other sides of the house. But the idea is a lot of people take this FHA loan right here and then they utilize house hacking up here, renting out the rooms, and then use this really low 3.5% to 5% down payment that they use for this FHA loan. That's the real benefit of it, and they're basically having somebody else paying down this difference, this insurance payment, and some of their mortgage payments. So they're cutting their costs, and they didn't have to do the full conventional 20% down payment. So that is what house hacking is. That's the idea behind that. There's rules for that too. Your FHA loan has to cash flow for you to be able to use it for house hacking for like a multi-family home. So like if you buy a house, in most states it doesn't really work with 8% interest rates, to be honest with you. It can work, in these cheaper states like Ohio, where I'm at. But basically, they calculated that your other renters have to cash flow on the house individually. So if you have a duplex and your mortgage is $750, essentially your DSCR has to be at least one from your other renters for it to qualify for an FHA. Otherwise, you have to pay a higher down payment, which defeats a lot of the reason you got the FHA loan in the first place. But yeah, there you go. So you probably are going to hear a lot of house hacking if your YouTube algorithm starts spitting out a bunch of stuff about real estate, but it's a little bit harder than it comes across as. So cash for keys, an agreement to give up keys for a house and move out in exchange for lump sum money. All right, we're into managing houses. So there's sometimes a scenario when maybe you buy a house and it already has a tenant inside of it, and you want to fix that house because maybe that tenant's paying $500 a month, and the house should be renting for $1,000 a month or whatever, but it's not fixed up, so it can't do that, and somebody's living there. So you go, hey, I'm going to give you, $1,000 to move out of this house, as long as you exchange me the keys. So that's a cash for keys agreement, pretty common. You can do that sometimes instead of an eviction. It might make more sense because it's just less costly to have them agree to this, hand you over the keys, kick them out of the house, and get them out. Then you have tenant screening. That's just background check. You might talk to different landlords. This is a question you usually want to ask if you're getting somebody to professionally manage your house. What is their tenant screening process? And make sure that makes sense to you, that they have everything that you're looking for. A lease, that's just your agreement between a tenant and landlord, states all the rules of the house, what they can and can't do, how much they're paying for rent, what the security deposit is, things along those lines. You got an eviction. That's legally removing somebody from your house, usually because they're not paying rent or they've done incredible amounts of damage. Then you got a squatter. That's someone illegally living at your house. You don't want those. I'm not a big fan of squatters. There you go. Hey y'all, I had a few more additions to real estate lingo for noobs for this Touch-Up Thursday. Just a few things on investment strategies that I didn't cover before. These are some common investment strategies that people utilize. One is BRRRR, which is buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. That's what that stands for. The next one is the short-term rental, which is essentially a stay of under 7 days. So this is like your Airbnbs that you see a lot of. That's what qualifies as a short-term rental. To qualify for the short-term rental tax loophole, which probably was the thing that jumped out to you guys when you looked at this, the short-term rental tax loophole goes against W-2 income. So like your job money, you can use this to write off your W-2 taxes, which a lot of people are really into. If you're like a doctor or something, you make over $200,000 a year. This is a very viable tactic. But essentially what it is you take a short-term rental, you qualify it by renting out for at least 14 days throughout the year where no one stayed over 7 days. And then you materially participate inside the house. So you like clean the house or you find the new people to move in or something like that. And then you can do all of that, all of those things basically. And you can qualify for writing off the depreciation of that house against your W-2 income without being a real estate professional. There's another one. I'm going to add a real estate professional is somebody who does at least 750 hours of real estate work per year, and they do it more than any other job, and they materially participate inside of real estate investment. So like a realtor is not a real estate professional, but why this is important is if you qualify as a real estate professional, you can utilize depreciation against your earned income. Very important if you are like a business owner to understand this, because you can do something like make $1 million in a year and buy an apartment complex and then write off all the depreciation against that apartment complex, against that $1 million you made, and paid no taxes. So that's how the rich do it. They qualify as real estate professionals, say they do that more than anything else. A midterm rental is any stay more than 7 days but less than 6 months. Long-term rental is over 6 months. So the idea kind of is you charge more for this midterm rental. So this can make sense to make you a little bit more money in areas that like cities that people might want to live in for 3 to 6 months because they have like a job movement over there. Like it was big during COVID with traveling nurses. Long-term rental is your typical rental. Somebody lives there for a year, signs a lease, goes forward. Self-storage, those are storage units. That's another investment strategy that people tend to go into, where they rent out these storage units to people, get involved there, and they own the land underneath. Glamping, that's glamorous camping. So all that is basically investing inside of an area that people might want to rent out, and putting things like RVs there, or putting up like huts for people to stay for essentially vacationing. That is the idea of glamping. A lot of those are short-term rentals, but it's a glamorous camping experience where somebody has a nice place to stay. And then land flipping is when you buy land and you expect to sell it. So a lot of times a land flipper might buy a large plot of land and then cut it into smaller plots by going through the county and sell each one individually. That's like land flipping strategy. Or they could just be buying under the interpretation they got a good deal and they can arbitrage it and flip it in time. Maybe that there's going to be development in the space. So those are some investment strategies I thought that I would add to real estate lingo for noobs. This Touch Up Thursday. So thanks y'all for watching.